Hello, we're going to welcome everybody to our YouTube video. This is the one that we've been talking about, our much anticipated YouTube video. I have with me Mr. Bourdon and Mr. Gray. And of course, everybody knows I'm Jeffrey Walden. I want to create the first video shoot. And we're just going to go ahead and do a brief introduction as well. So why don't you go ahead and start off there, Mr. Gray. Just give a brief introduction, why you're here, a little bit about your situation.
Well, presently, I'm here to try to correct the wrong injustice that has been done to not just me and my fellow compadres here, being falsely removed from federal service.
Okay, Mr. Bourdon.
Okay, my name is Jonathan Bourdon. Currently with the website Jonathan Bourdon Whistleblowing. You can see that at www.notanaccident.org. I'm here with my fellow officers here. We blew the whistle on the Navy. They retaliated and they fired us. They have been harassing Officer Gray here since I've known him. I became an officer in 1996, June. My understanding and witness of the harassment of Mr. Gray here started when I first came on board the department. There's been bad blood between myself and the department ever since, I believe, August of 1996 is when it initially started. Officer Walls didn't come on to the department until 2000, actually beginning in 2001 at the Washington U.S. Naval Observatory in Northwest Washington, D.C. So we are here to explain to you pretty much what has happened between ourselves and the Navy. So I'm going to give you not the meat and potatoes, so to speak, but I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of what has happened and why we have our website, what happened to us, and the correlation between our whistleblowing and the events that took place in September of 2013 with the shooting at the Washington Navy Yard, which was not an accident. To continue with a short timeline here, I came on in 1996. I started receiving, in August of that year, I was dating an African-American woman, and I had introduced her to a supervisor who didn't quite take fondness of interracial relationships, and apparently had something I guess a likingness for her, and I guess himself was interested, and when he found out she was dating me, I started getting harassed, and I realized right away that it was reverse racism. This continued for through 97, and then up to about, and it got worse when in 1998 when I got married to her. Her name will remain anonymous for right now. After that, the harassment I was receiving just started. I was always told I was being late, I was not where I was supposed to be, I didn't answer radio calls, the harassment stepped up, bad counseling statements were written on me, although all my performance evaluations were satisfactory. So in 1999, after the harassment took a more turmoil turn, I went on WTOP News and with Alan Etter and did a news article for explosive charges of racial discrimination at the Washington Navy Yard. A little bit of time after Officer Gray was still down at the Navy Yard, I witnessed supervisors harassing him One of them challenged him to a fight. I would also hear pretty much they would badmouth his name. They would tell people to stay away from him. He took the brunt of a lot of harassment between the time I spent at the Navy Yard from 1996 till I left there in January of 2000 and went up to the Naval Observatory and was there through 2007 when I was terminated. In 2000 and it was quiet with me up there. Officer Walls came up to the Naval Observatory at that time in 2001. I trained him there when he first came on board. He did bike patrol up there. He was an outstanding officer, as Officer Gray here. The announcements came out over the radio about this, and during the time that happened, our protocol was we needed to contact the supervisors about closing the gate, locking our gates, pending a possible terrorist threat. So I had done that one day. Our radios weren't working. There were no supervisors answering any telephones. We tried to call them on cell phones. None of our supervisors were available, nor our communications at the Washington Navy Yard, probably because the Washington Navy Yard was not associated with Capital Wide One, which every law enforcement agency accessed to communicate with each other throughout the city. NDW had their own radio system, which ultimately has failed. And our belief is, and the knowledge that we have, and the evidence that we have presented, that also on our website, that led to these possible 12 deaths at the Washington Navy Yard. And we believe that the system that they had in place that failed us previously failed us again. They had the opportunity to fix it. They didn't. And a few short years after they fired me, this is what happened, and they were notified. 3 members of Congress were notified. They failed to properly investigate in violation of the 1989 Whistleblower Protection Act and the Whistleblower Protection Act of 2012. So in 2005, there was that overflight. Shortly thereafter, we did a newspaper article with the Washington Post. Alan Lingle was the writer, where we expressed our concerns. This was totally off duty and aside from anything we had to do. It wasn't even while at our duty stations. This was totally on our own off time. It was initiated by another officer who is still currently working there, probably because he is in their so-called clique. The normal thing that happens at the Washington Navy Yard or the Naval District of Washington is if you are in somebody's clique, you're good to go. You can get anything you want. If you are not, you are chastised and they look to terminate you. So this agency is really, they're really corrupt. They don't care what they do. They don't follow regulations. So in 2006, January, was a newspaper article that came out, training equipment failures at the Naval District of Washington. Eleanor Holmes Norton had 2 hearings up on Capitol Hill to the effect. It was requested that she was to investigate this. She never did. Senator Barbara Mikulski was asked to investigate it. Senator Mikulski never did. And the only statement that she was said in the newspaper article was, "We can do better." Obviously, they didn't, and 12 people paid the price for it, ultimately. So we went to Donna Edwards. I don't know what her district is, but we went to Representative Donna Edwards. We even met her, myself and Mr. Walls. She never investigated at all. She acted as if she didn't care, but yet she stood in front of the cameras at the memorial service at the Washington Navy Yard for those 12 individuals as if she was so brokenhearted or she felt so sorry for what had happened. Well, she should feel sorry because she's partly at fault. She could have prevented it at the time we told her, and she didn't. So the newspaper article that came out in 2006, the agency put me under investigation without notifying me. In November of 2006, there was I owned property in York, Pennsylvania. I was harassed by a city codes writer and a police officer by the name of William B. Wentz. The city of York is very corrupt. We'll elaborate more on that a little later as we go on. This police officer in particular filed false police charges, charges on me in their criminal court system. It took me a year to get those charges dismissed. Officer Walls came to my trial in November of 2007. In less than 30 minutes, those charges were dismissed. And also, I'll make note that I was fired in violation of our union collective bargaining agreement 5 months before the resolution of those charges in November of 2007. So in May of 2007, I was terminated from federal service, and basically I was made homeless. And then, so just to give you a brief idea, the properties I had in York, Pennsylvania, I lost them all. I owned like 4 or 5 properties up there. I had to let all of them go. So from 2006, December, the false charges were filed on me. Members of the Naval District of Washington went up to all the hearings. Investigator Richard Gilbert interfered with my judicial process and decided to go back into the judge's chambers, and then I was remanded to the court system for a prosecution, and they terminated me in violation of our union collective bargaining agreement before the resolution of those charges. Mr. Walls?
I would like to start off by saying that I'm associated with 2 fine gentlemen, as well as some of the other individuals who are either reluctant to show up or reluctant for various reasons, even some fear and some intimidation that has been brought on some of our assistants. Myself, I was not aware of a lot of the corruption that went on back in 2001. I was just pretty much doing my job. It wasn't until later on I decided to take on the position of being the shop steward for the midnight shift. At that point, individuals were coming to me and they were expressing concerns about certain things. A lot of things that I got to admit that I pretty much pushed aside. And I can be the one who would admit, just like Mr. Boydon stated, I was somewhat in the clique, and there was some type of favoritism shown on my side in certain situations. As soon as I decided to go ahead and look at some of the things that some of the officers brought to me, certain things that involve supervisors manipulating the time cards so that they can put themselves in. I noticed that one supervisor put himself in for 46 hours of overtime. Nothing was said. There was no accountability whatsoever involved in this. And at the same time, training requests. People, officers looking for training, just simple training. Training that will only take 1 day with a Metropolitan DC at the Blue Ridge, at the Blue Ridge Range. Just simple requests was being denied, but yet we was informed that bonuses of up to $30,000 to $60,000 were being paid out to these high-ranking supervisors, which was a cause of concern for me. I later found out that the situation with the radio that Mr. Boydon was talking about close to $1 million contract was placed on these radios, and these radios still was not functioning. Found out that it was a procurement contract that was drawn up by one of the other supervisors that we had. We brought that to the Inspector General's office. There was a situation where they brought gas masks, $1,200 gas masks, but yet still we had no body armor. $1,200 gas mask that you can go to a surplus store and get for $200. These gas masks were bulky. We had to carry them around in a big, black, huge bag. 2 months later, they said that they was obsolete, get rid of them. But we found out that a supervisor contracted this, and he pocketed close to almost $30,000, $40,000. We tried to bring all this information up. Later on, I was one of the individuals who showed up at one of the congressional hearings. I literally heard one of Rear Admiral McKnight, who was the commandant, sit there and said that we have no problem with the radios. The radios are fine. We put that on our website. I highlighted on our website that the radio was fine. And in the meantime, each officer put in a petition that is also on our website. Every officer at the Naval Observatory and at the Washington Navy Yard filed a petition stating that the radio was bad. We had the dispatch office submit an email saying, whatever you have to do, try to use your cell phone as much as possible because the radios are faulty.
That information is also on our website.
That information is also on our website. We tried to bring this up to a congressional hearing. As I stated later on, having an association with the union and being shop steward, I met with our union chairman, S.K. Johnson, doing lunch one time. He literally went towards my direction to sit down at a table beside me and inform me, saying, look, how would you like to become a sergeant? I told him my name was not even on the list for the promotion list to be a sergeant. He said, don't even worry about that. How would you like to become a sergeant? And I said, well, what would I have to do? He stated, back off of the administration. I perceive that to be a bribe. Later on, in 2007, I started to receive the same harassment that Mr. Gray received and the same harassment that Mr. Bourdon received. I would be showing up. They would put me down for being 5 minutes late, and I'd be looking at my watch going, what are they talking about? The supervisor would start harassing me. They would say that I'm not at the right place. I'm supposed to be here. They would tell me to go one place, and then they would say that I wasn't at this one place, and at the same time, I would try to rush over to this place, and then they'd say, oh, you've been written up because you was not at a certain place at a certain time. There was a situation that came out of this in which I was assisting a young lady. She was intoxicated. I was so feared that I was not supposed to be at this spot that I decided that I had to go over there first and then come back and attend to this lady. They took advantage of that opportunity to sit there and say that I pretty much placed the lady in jeopardy. They totally just blew the whole situation out of proportion, exaggerated beyond ungodly known reasons. I had the young lady, I was able to contact the young lady. She wrote a statement. I took it to the investigators. I had the officer who assisted me write a statement, and each one said that I acted appropriately. They dropped the investigation, in which I wanted the investigation against the supervisors. They said that they're not going to do a real investigation, that there's no such thing as an investigation. But in the meantime, they continued to go ahead and go work with the 30-day suspension. During that time, I was injured at my place of employment. Once being injured at my place of employment, I was automatically supposed to be on workers' comp. I injured my knee. I tore my meniscus. During that time frame, I was automatically told that I need to come back to work within 7 days. I was still under doctor's orders. I was told to come back to work or I was going to be terminated. I decided to go back to work. At the same time, I injured my knee a second time. This time, I heeded my doctor's instructions. This time it was a complete tear. And this time they told me that not to go back no matter what until you get this knee procedure. Within that time frame, I was being followed from my house by a dark colored vehicle. We have photos of this. By At first I thought it was the Department of Labor trying to check and see if my story was correct. We was able to track down some of the vehicles from the Washington Navy Yard. It was some of our supervisors following us, although I wasn't even working anymore.
To reiterate on Mr. Walls's incident where he took care of this lady and they tried to terminate him behind it. There was a gentleman that worked for the Naval District of Washington by the name of Tom Crane. We do not know this man, what his current duty assignment was. We only perceive that he was some kind of investigator, although we kept trying to ask him what his main duty was. He was the one who came after me at the Mayor's System Protection Board and tried to negotiate. But what he did was he went and got a copy, or actually what happened, he falsified evidence from our communications. They have different computer networks that they print our run sheets off of, to where once you make a radio call, it goes into the computer, it's documented, and they print it out on a certain system. Mr. Tom Crane used another one and presented the false one, and
used that
as evidence against Mr. Walls at the Mayor's System Protection Board. That is evidence tampering. Not to mention they falsified their testimony in court at the Mayor's System Protection Board. This is how corrupt these folks are. S.K. Johnson and Detective Richard Gilbert tried to coerce me into making false statements by admitting that I was guilty of something when I wasn't. This is basically a pattern and practice that they have. They tried the same with Mr. Walls. It's also been tried with Mr. Gray. This is a pattern and practice that they have when they want to target you, they want to come after you, and they want you to make false statements in order to incriminate you so that they can get rid of you. They, when my wife and I separated, the investigators with Officer Walls as witness, they tried to ask her to coerce her into making a lying statement in order to get rid of me, and she refused. But at that time they thought that Mr. Walls was in their clique, but obviously he was not. So this gentleman, S.K. Johnson, was our union chairman. He would have drunken union meetings at the Fraternal Order of Police. Their main order of business was not to talk about concerns, but to consume alcohol and get drunk. And when you bring up legitimate concerns, you are chastised.
And we brought that before the union, the union chairman, Canterbury, and we informed them about the
DC Lodge 1 President Marcelo Muzai
that was involved, and bring on the fact that, going back to the radio incident with old Tom Crane,